Okay, in this video we're going to do some tactics. We're going to go over an Afghan Mujahideen convoy ambush. They're more common tactics that they did against Soviet supply convoys. The biggest way that they hit the Soviets was attack the supply convoys, cause the enemy to always be critical on supplies, put in extra troops on doing security along lines of communication so that there was fewer troops to be devoted for combat operations hunting down the Mujahideen elements. Now, before we get into that, I'm just going to say, I hope you guys like the little Where's the Zombies video I did this morning. We'll see what the comments are going to be like today. And I'll probably have someone post this online for me tomorrow. So let's jump into the tactics here. Now, the typical Mujahideen ambush was a minimum of 1 to 2 kilometers in length, up to 5 to 7 kilometers in length. That's from security element all the way to security element. Along primary lines of communication, major roadways. The typical team that was employed in this was squad size, with the average element being about 6 personnel. And they would be spread out along the route. Each team could potentially be covering up to 1 kilometer of roadway. It just depended on the weapon systems they had available to them. As much as possible, they tried to locate themselves on higher ground so that they would shoot down from above onto the enemy targets to where it's more lightly armored and to make it more difficult for the Soviet troops to return fire. Now, one thing that they did employ, or could have employed, is spider holes for RPG teams. So 2-person teams, these spider holes were located along the sides of the roads at approximately vehicle spacing. So you could have these 6-person teams, they could be spread out. Say you have 2 people with an RPG here, then approximate vehicle spacing down would be the next 2-person team, and then the next 2-person team on vehicle spacing. For where I'm getting this information from, I should mention this quick, is this book, Tactics of the Crescent Moon by H. John Poole. The Mujahideen would choose the most advantageous location for an ambush. They would find out when the enemy supply convoys would typically travel along that route. The Soviets were usually pretty predictable. One thing that I've come across is before the Soviets would do any type of operation or movement, they would do massive layouts. They would lay out the tools for vehicles. The soldiers would lay out all their weapons and gear for inspection. When the Mujahideen spies would see that, they would report it to the unit in the field, either by radio or by hand carrying the message or word of mouth. Then the appropriate Mujahideen element would put the ambush into place. They would move to their objective rally point before dawn. Quick recon would be made of the area to make sure that everything was still good to go for setting up the ambush in that location. Do a quick review of the plan to make sure everyone knew what they were supposed to do. Then they would break into teams and occupy their positions. They typically had 4 basic elements inside their ambushes depending on the intent. They were the security and blocking force, the assault force, support by fire heavy weapons force, and if they were trying to capture supplies, they would have a supply evacuation and medevac force. So what we have here, we have security, a blocking force down here, security blocking force up here, our assault elements. We have support by fire heavy weapons here, mortars and rockets. And over here, if the terrain allowed for it, its employment, heavy machine gun or recoilless rifle, support by fire element. They would try to locate the heavy weapons, the direct fire heavy weapons, the heavy machine guns and recoilless rifles, so that they would be firing down the length of the convoy, either from the front or from the rear, depending on the terrain. Mortars and rockets were typically located behind the ambush on a major terrain feature farther back. The supply evacuation and medevac group would be located in areas where that they could move forward quickly to strip the supplies that were needed from the enemy troops, from the enemy convoy. If possible, they would employ horses or light trucks. Now, typically, how this was initiated. The convoy would come through. The Soviets typically would have a security element travel in front of their supply convoys. This could be a couple BTRs or a couple BMPs, possibly with a tank, possibly with a ZSU-23-4 air defense system. They would let that security element pass through the ambush zone. It would get past the security element down at the end of the ambush. And then once the main body was inside the ambush, they would initiate. Typically everything was done with visual signals. They would first open up with their mortars and rockets and the heavy machine gun and recoilless rifles. Their first target was command vehicles. Knock that out, because the Soviets had a huge problem with, once the leader was taken out, the next person in command taking over. There was a huge problem with them, unlike in the US military where leaders train the person underneath them to take their position if they're taken out. The Soviets did not do that. So the first thing they would do, take out the command vehicle. And then, depending on what they would do, what the purpose of the ambush was, if it's to destroy the supply trucks, they would then target the supply trucks. If they were trying to capture supplies, they would then concentrate on taking out security elements inside the convoy and also disabling the trucks. Now, depending on the length of the convoy, if it would be larger than the ambush, they would try to bust it up, bust it into smaller groups and isolate each group. They would then concentrate on the one element to take it out, and they would try to make sure that the other element could not provide support to the element that was inside the kill zone. So what we did here, we have the ambushes initiated, mortars, heavy machine gun, recoilless rifle, which will come up here, start raking these vehicles, stop them from traveling out of the kill zone. RPG gunner back here takes out a supply truck right here on the curve. When they would use trucks as the block, they would target large ammo trucks or fuel trucks, especially fuel trucks. When those went up, it was a huge bang, huge fireball, huge column of smoke. This would cause massive confusion amongst the convoy. The vehicle that they would destroy like this was typically at the midway point or at the rear of the convoy. Like I said, to cause confusion, to get them looking to the back and stuff to figure out what's going on. And while that's going on, they're getting hit from the sides or getting hit from the front. After they completed the purpose of their ambush, whether it was destroying the supply trucks or capturing supplies, they would then start falling back. The first elements to fall back would be the support by fire heavy weapons. The mortars and rocket teams here and the direct fire heavy weapon over here. They would evacuate along concealed routes to evacuate the area, get their weapons onto trucks or horses that were already waiting for the equipment, get the stuff loaded up, and they would fall back. Right after them would be, if they were capturing supplies, the trucks or horses carrying the supplies would fall back right behind the heavy weapons. Then it would be the assault force. The last ones to pull out would be the security and blocking force. The security and blocking force would be the ones to provide rear security as everyone was falling back. Now, some notes here that I have. They would reuse old fighting positions and dig or construct new ones, especially in areas that they've had a lot of success with ambushing convoys in the past. The Soviets typically would not go through and destroy the positions or mine them. They would just leave them be and clear out the area. They also would not recon those heavily used ambush sites for some reason. That was a huge mistake that they made, and the Mujahideen capitalized on it. If the purpose of the ambush was to capture supplies, the ambushing force, when they would move in, would make sure that the positions that they occupied or dug would be able to withstand a bombardment of indirect or direct fire for up to 1 hour. They typically would attack from both sides at the same time, unless there was some type of restrictive terrain on the one side that would prevent the convoy from either the security force moving up to get better fires on the ambushers or allow the enemy to escape. So right now we're saying that this is a drop-off here. That's why there's no attacking force on this side. We have high ground on this side, and that's where our ambushers are located. Mines would be used in locations where security elements would likely move to in order to dismount troops or provide support by fire. So here we have a BTR that was located inside the column. Ambush is going on up over here. He's got to move into position to either put fires on the ambushers up here or potentially the heavy weapon down here, possibly dismount troops. So what the Mujahideen did in this little open area here, they would put anti-tank mines. Farther back, they would potentially put anti-personnel mines, but if they did that, then their own elements that were hiding back here for evacuating supplies would have to travel through the mines. So you would probably have just a string of mines going across this way that the vehicle would have to move through to get into position. Notes I came across on the mines that were used in these positions were anti-tank mines, typically stacked anti-tank mines, with the most common being 3 anti-tank mines, one on top of the other, so that they would get a catastrophic kill on that security vehicle. Ideally, the entire ambush would be done complete before helicopter gunships would arrive. That's where the position needed to be able to withstand up to an hour's worth of direct or indirect fire would come into play. If they were there too long because they're stripping the convoy, they needed to get into those positions and wait for that helicopter gunship to come through, do its barrage, and get out of the area. They weren't going to loiter around too long because of the possibility of air defense fire, especially Stinger missiles. So, and how long the response time of the gunships was varied from area to area. It's possible that if the gunships were only sitting on the airfield, they were on alert status there, it would take longer to get out to the convoy to support them. If the gunships were tagging alongside the convoy, obviously the response time was a lot quicker. I know I've come across notes stating that later in the war, the Soviets did start sending heliborne troops, their air assault troops. They would have them travel with the convoys, say a kilometer or two away. And if there was any problems, like an ambush like this, their Mi-8 HIP transports would come in and drop a blocking force behind the ambush, and then as these guys are falling back, they would come into an ambush that the Soviets set up behind them. But that was later in the war. Earlier in the war, less of an issue. So that's what I have down for basic notes on conducting, or how the Afghan Mujahideen conducted convoy ambushes. They were spread out over long distances, broken up into small teams. They would first target command vehicles because of the structure of the Soviet military and the reaction times. Then, depending on the purpose of the ambush, they would either engage the security vehicles to knock them out, or if they're trying to just destroy the trucks and then get out of the area, they would target the supply trucks. And their main targets would be your semi-trucks loaded with ammunition and fuel. Those would be the priority ones to take out. If the convoy was too large, they would try to bust it in half or into smaller groups and try to keep them so confused and disorganized that an effective defense could not be mounted. They would try to accomplish the ambush as quick as possible and pull out of the area before the enemy's helicopter gunships or troop transports could respond and provide support to the ambushed convoy. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.